what life is really like in maximum security. Don't miss out on more true crime stories. Hit subscribe, like, share, and join the conversation in the comments. The cell door slammed shut with a metallic echo that rattled the concrete walls of Colorado's ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in America. Inside, inmate number 04475-748 sat motionless on his bunk. His name, Ted Kaczynski, known to the world as the Unabomber. But on that freezing morning in 1998, even a man who had terrorized the nation with bombs was silent, watching something unfold across the tier that no one could believe. Down the row, another inmate, Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, was screaming. Guards sprinted down the corridor as Youssef banged his fists against the steel door, shouting at another notorious prisoner across the block. That prisoner was Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. The world's deadliest men were locked inside one building, and now, two of them were locked in a war of words so intense it sent shockwaves through the entire facility. "Coward!" Youssef yelled. "You killed children." McVeigh's reply was cold and calm. "You tried to. I succeeded." That sentence, heard by several guards, froze everyone in place. Within seconds, the hallway filled with emergency response teams, shouting orders, pulling men from cells, slamming locks. The entire Supermax went into lockdown. The blue lights flashed. Alarms echoed. ADX Florence had over 400 inmates, each one considered too dangerous, too violent, or too unpredictable for any other prison. But that morning, something deeper broke inside those walls. It wasn't a riot or a fight. It was a glimpse into what life in America's most secure prison was really like. Total isolation, endless silence, and minds beginning to break under pressure. Guards later said they could hear shouting echo for hours after the lockdown ended. McVeigh was escorted away, cuffed and silent, his eyes blank. Youssef muttered curses in Arabic as they dragged him in the opposite direction. And Ted Kaczynski, sitting on his bed, simply stared at the wall, whispering, "It never ends." The warden ordered every inmate confined 24 hours that day. No recreation, no calls, no mail. Even meals were slid through a small steel slot. The men inside called it the box inside the box. As night fell, the facility went silent again. But behind the walls of concrete and steel, whispers spread among guards. If two of the most dangerous men in American history could nearly ignite chaos from isolation, what was really happening inside these cells, where prisoners never saw each other, never touched another human, and lived for decades with nothing but their thoughts? Because at ADX Florence, the punishment wasn't just the cell. It was the silence. And that silence was about to drive one man to the edge, someone the world would least expect. The man who began to unravel wasn't a terrorist or a serial killer. His name was Thomas Silverstein, a name few Americans knew, but inside prison walls, he was a legend. Convicted of multiple murders inside other federal prisons, Silverstein had spent over 35 years in complete isolation, the longest stretch of solitary confinement in U.S. history. His cell was buried deep in the special housing unit of ADX Florence, where every movement was tracked and every sound was swallowed by concrete. His days were all the same. A steel door. No window. A tray of food slid through a slot. The only light came from a dim bulb that never went off. The only voices came from guards giving short, cold orders. Back to the wall. Hands visible. The only color was gray, and the faint blue glow from the security lights above. But something had changed inside Silverstein. Years of silence had turned time into something unreal. He started talking to himself, holding full conversations with people who weren't there. He'd carved drawings into the walls using a spoon handle, sketching faces of people he once knew. "This place isn't for living," he wrote in a letter once. "It's for disappearing." Meanwhile, outside his cell, the prison staff faced their own battle. The administration called ADX Florence a clean version of hell. Guards were forbidden from speaking to inmates more than necessary. Psychologists rotated constantly. Few could handle the tension long term. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the pressure of men losing their minds quietly, behind locked doors. But in late 2004, something unusual began happening. Guards reported hearing banging late at night from Silverstein's cell, loud, rhythmic, like someone pounding the walls to get out. When they checked, he was calm, sitting cross-legged on the floor, smiling faintly. "Didn't you hear it?" he asked. "The walls are breathing." The prison brought in mental health staff, but Silverstein refused help. "I'm fine," he said. "It's the place that's sick, not me." Other inmates began to sense the tension. Ted Kaczynski, writing letters to journalists, called ADX a place built to destroy the human spirit. Even McVeigh, before his execution, said the silence was worse than death. Guards began to whisper about the curse of the tombs, their nickname for the lower tier, where the worst inmates were buried in concrete. Then one morning, during routine rounds, a guard noticed Silverstein's cell was eerily quiet. No drawings, no letters, no sound. When the officers opened the door, they found him sitting perfectly still, eyes open, hands resting on his knees, as if frozen in time. He had been that way for hours. The warden ordered medical in immediately. Paramedics rushed down the hallway, blue lights flashing against gray walls. But by the time they reached him, Thomas Silverstein, America's longest-held isolated prisoner, was gone. And that's when the investigation began. Not into how he died, but what ADX Florence had done to everyone trapped inside it. The death of Thomas Silverstein sent shockwaves through the Bureau of Prisons. News outlets called him the ghost of ADX Florence, a man who had vanished in plain sight. But for the officers and inmates still inside, his death was more than a headline. It was a warning. Something about that place, something invisible, was breaking everyone who entered it. In the months that followed, federal investigators quietly arrived at the prison. They reviewed camera footage, interviewed staff, and read through years of Silverstein's handwritten letters. Each one revealed more than just loneliness. It showed the slow unraveling of a human mind trapped too long in silence. "Every sound becomes louder," one letter said. "The drip of water feels like thunder. My heartbeat is the only clock that still ticks." But what stunned the investigators most wasn't what they found in Silverstein's cell. It was what they found in others. Inmate after inmate showed signs of severe psychological collapse. Men were cutting themselves, smearing messages on the walls, whispering to people who weren't there. One guard told the team, "You don't just watch men go crazy here, you start feeling it yourself." Inside the administrative offices, the warden defended the prison's design. "These are the worst of the worst," he said. "They deserve to be here." But even he couldn't hide the unease spreading among his staff. Suicides were rising. Guards were transferring out. And inmates were filing lawsuits, claiming prolonged isolation was torture. Then, one winter morning in 2012, something happened that forced the world to finally look at what was really going on inside ADX. A letter leaked to the media, written by a convicted mob boss who had once been housed near Silverstein's cell. In it, he described men losing their minds, screaming through vents all night, begging for someone to talk to. He called ADX a slow-motion death sentence. The story exploded. News cameras gathered outside the gates. Former wardens went on record saying what many already knew, that ADX Florence wasn't built just to contain bodies, it was built to break spirits. Soon, human rights lawyers stepped in. They filed a case arguing that the extreme isolation violated the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. Even the federal judge overseeing the case admitted the conditions were beyond what any human being should endure. As years passed, some changes began. A few inmates were moved to lower security prisons. Mental health programs were expanded. But many men, like Ted Kaczynski, Ramzi Youssef, and others, remained locked in those concrete boxes, living out their days in silence. In 2023, a journalist who had followed the case for decades managed to interview one former guard. When asked what life was really like inside ADX Florence, the man paused, eyes distant, and said, "It's quiet. Too quiet. You start to hear your own thoughts echo back. You go home, and you still hear the doors closing. It's like the place never lets you leave." And that's the truth most people never see, what life is really like in maximum security. Not the violence, not the noise, but the silence. The kind of silence that changes a person forever.